Today, I'm delighted to announce that Warren Bennis has been named a recipient of the Fred Leadership Award. I can't think of anyone that's more deserving. Not only is he a great leader himself, but one of the great students and teachers of leadership. He's accumulated a lifetime of remarkable achievements, and I'd like to cover just a few in the way of introduction. Warren Bennis is one of the world's leading experts on leadership. Indeed, Forbes magazine called him the Dean of Leadership Gurus. He's a distinguished professor of business administration and the founding chairman of the Leadership Institute at the University of Southern California. He's also the chair of the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School and a distinguished research fellow at the Harvard Business School. He's written more than 25 books, including the classic on becoming a leader, and his most recent books are Geeks and Geezers and The Essential Bennis. He's been an advisor to 4 U.S. presidents, including John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. He's the former provost and executive vice president at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and the former president at the University of Cincinnati. Warren, I'd like to start by asking you a question about something that was in the Essential Bennis book. You talked about a very young experience that you had of reinventing yourself. Mm-hmm. What was that like, and what was the lesson that you carried forward from that?
My dad, in 1932, when I was 7, was a shipping clerk. And he came home one night and said, "I'd just been fired." Right in the very bottom of the Depression. And he looked forlorn and helpless, and my family did. My older brothers did. And I was scared. The important thing I got out of that crucible experience is the key thing was I don't ever want to let that happen to me. I don't ever want to be at the effect of somebody else. I want to be something. I want to make myself, which is ridiculous, invulnerable to the vicissitudes of cycles of the economy. I was having a hard time seeing the frailty of my parents. That's a big one.
So you decided to reinvent yourself.
I don't know no place to go but up. I would say I was a very, very late bloomer. I don't think I figured out what I wanted to do really until, isn't it strange? Until I was about 54.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I'm not saying I was totally characterless, but when I grew up right through high school, up until the time I went into the Army at the age of 3 weeks before I was 18, in 1943, I felt like a characterless, dull, boring, cipher. Now I tell it, and I felt shy and inhibited, and if I tell it to people right now who know me now, people listening, viewing this, say, is he bullshitting? Come on, he couldn't be that way, could he? Well, he could, he was.
Who influenced you the most when you were very young?
Margaret Mead. One of her most famous lines, she said, "Remember, young man, that a small, committed group of people can change the world." And I began thinking about Jesus, 12 people. I began thinking about groups that can change the world. So to carry on that, in the Army, 4 years, one of the youngest infantry platoon leaders in Germany, I started growing up, learning that I could do some things like, I wouldn't say brave, but being in harm's way. But learning one more important thing. I luckily went from OCS in Fort Benning, Georgia, to a seasoned division that had been fighting for 3 months. Those guys trained me to be their leader. Can you imagine?
Yeah, and you had good instincts. How did you first get interested in the topic of leadership? and leadership development.
When we get psychological about leaders, we're always talking about the family dynamics. We talk about George W. and his Oedipal complex, maybe with his head. I mean, by and large, these psychological, dispositional personality factors of leadership almost always relate to the importance of your upbringing, and it is extremely important. But it also underplays the significance of role. Because I think, for me, role brought out in me being, a 19-year-old kid being an infantry platoon leader in Germany. All the possible selves that Habermas, the German philosopher, talks about. We don't know ourselves, all the possibilities we have within us, till we try it, till we do it.
I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what you mean by crucible, and how did you come to that insight?
For myself, and maybe for a lot of others, it's always something that vexes you, that you don't quite understand. Always wondering, what is it that shapes the character of leaders? What is it? So that was the question. And then, working with Bob Thomas, we decided to write a book on differences between leaders who were young and leaders who were older. But what fascinated us was the stories people told when we asked them, well, what was the key seminal experience that shaped you most of all as a leader? Now, there may be many of them, but what was the key one? Or mention two, because we keep having crucibles all throughout. And those stories became the heart of the book, the crucible, when we call it crucibles, because we keep having crucibles. And those stories became the heart of the book, and we call it crucibles. I'm going to bring together with something I alluded to earlier. Gardner is in our book, John Gardner. And here's a man who a lot of our viewers may not remember the name know who John Gardner is. He was a great man and wrote some great, my favorite book on leadership, aside from Shakespeare's works, is his On Leadership, which he wrote in 1990. I mean, here's this kid born from humble origins, Roman Catholic. His very nature was a little bit reserved. In a non-political way, his character was very conservative. He spoke clearly and economically and profoundly. I said, John, how did you get from there to here? He said something that still haunts me today, almost 10 years later. He said, I don't know. And then he said, I guess there were some qualities there that life was waiting to pull out of me. I guess there were some qualities there that life was waiting to pull out of me.
You said the quality of our lives depends on the quality of our leadership. Mm-hmm. Could you expand on that a little bit?
They've got studies from all over the world about what bad bosses can do to you, aside from there may be distorted dreams, physically, emotionally. So just in terms of people in the workplace, leadership is important. But in terms of being able to set goals that make you proud. Nehru once said about Gandhi, he said, Gandhi made India proud of herself. People whose goals are transcendental, whose goals are covenantal, whose goals are making the world better. Leaders can drag us into unwanted wars. Must we look for a better example than the last 8 years? Do I worry about Obama right now and what's going on in Afghanistan, Pakistan? Yes, I do. I'm less interested, Jim, that our brand perception of U.S. is sunk to zero. I'm less worried about that than how we feel about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's what leadership can do, how we feel about ourselves. Certainly at the national level, also at the organizational level.
Let me ask you about followership. Nobody talks about followership. It's always about leadership, and yet you've said many times that followers play a vital role in excellent leadership. What makes a great follower?
Same thing that makes a good leader, with a couple of exceptions. Leadership is, if nothing else, a relationship. So the question, in what makes followers important, why did you start thinking and writing about them, is there wouldn't be leadership without someone who's by your side, that in this case you're leading toward a common goal. Leadership is not in a quarantine spouting out great wisdoms. Leadership, and there's so much in those stories. Will they come when you call them? What is it that makes a leader have that appeal? With a follower, the one big difference in following and leading, in a kind of a positional sense, is that followers typically report to leaders. But the nature of their relationship, the realization that their fates are correlated, the realization that the best you can ever get from anybody you're working with, follower, colleague, or what, is a sense of real partnership, of knowing that by yourself you could not do that. I've been teaching a course with the university president at USC for 14 years. We're very different in every way you can think of, values, politics, religion, all that. But we've come to respect our differences, but the most important thing about our partnership is that we know we couldn't teach this course without the other. So when you think about leadership and fellowship, they are like parts of the same.
What's the advice, wisdom that you would pass on to today's senior leaders who are facing enormous challenges from world economic crisis, environmental crisis, to a serious loss of trust in senior leadership and their institutions?
If you want to restore the honor of being a manager, a leader in business, you've got to create a system which is much more transparent, follows the rules of regulation, chooses people based on as close as you can get to making sure you don't pick psychopaths, sociopaths, but basically creating a culture where you realize you cannot see the trouble, in a nutshell, the problem with the design flaws of the system, behind it is the leadership which forgot to remind people of what's important. What's important to the financial is to create enough cash flows so that entrepreneurs and other people can better their lives, so they will have more money to pay taxes to better our schools. They'd forgotten what the leaders forgot to remind them of what's important. And boy, if there's one key task, Max de Priest gave one of them, which is define reality. The second one is every day remind people of what's important. If you ask me what is the epitaph I would like on my tombstone, I don't know how many times I've been asked that. I have only one answer. 2 words: generous company. That's what I want to be known for. Not anything else more than that. And just one thing, just came upon a quote. Just came upon it the other day. Attributed to, but not with some uncertainty, to Philo, 5th century BC philosopher, who said, I want to get his exact words, one sentence. It said, he wrote, "Be kind to everyone you meet, because each of us, each of them, is fighting a great battle." We all are dealing with issues that go unrecognized a lot, but I love that. Be kind to everyone you meet, because they're all fighting a great battle.